IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. On the podcast today, we speak to Saloni Prasad from the Surat Heritage Project as she takes us around a virtual tour of this historic city of Surat. So let's hop onto the episode and find out more. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Saloni Prasad, a curator with Surat Heritage Project, to the Musafir Stories. Saloni, thank you so much for being a part of the Musafir Stories and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been actually, I love to talk about Surat. So, yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Definitely.
Thank you, Saloni. And we are also very eagerly looking forward to speaking and chatting with you a little bit more about Surat Heritage Project as well as about you and what you do. The intro I gave was very brief and concise. So why don't you speak a little bit more about yourself and also about Surat Heritage Project?
I'll start with Surat Heritage Project, which started officially in 2021, although I started researching about Surat back in 2019. Surat Heritage Project is kind of an initiative to raise more awareness about Surat's heritage, which is a very Surat is an old city, but people don't know about it. People know it more about as a diamond city, as a textile city, as a modern city, but it doesn't know that there is a 600-year documented historical story associated with the city. So I thought there should be more awareness about it. So that with that motive, this community started, and my major primary goal was to connect the youth because I think youth needs to be aware more. We do a couple of things. We do walks, yes. We collaborate with other organizations to help them gather data, to organize some data on Surat, and so we have some other projects and some other bigger things that we do in the pipeline with other people as well. So let's hope that that also materializes soon. Coming to me, I am an engineer by my degree, but I don't practice it anymore. And I am a writer and a storyteller by passion. So, which is where Surat history and Surat story also comes in because I absolutely love talking about that. And professionally, I'm a facilitator. I design courses for college students so that they can be upskilled to be more equipped to work and in 21st century, especially how do you work at places and other stuff. Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. It's great that you're doing so many great things, both at a personal and professional front, as well as with Surat Heritage Project. And kudos and hats off to you in creating more awareness about historic cities like these, right? As we were chatting just before the recording as well, even I've lived in Bangalore most of my life, and I had little to no knowledge about a lot of the things about places that I pretty much frequented or passed by every day or pretty much every week. And walks and initiatives like this have definitely helped me improve my knowledge about my city. So that way, I think kudos to you about spreading awareness about Surat's rich history and legacy. And we'll definitely dive into a little bit more in terms of making our audience too aware about Surat's rich past. A quick intro to, if I can also request you to give a quick background for people outside of Surat, just to get a sense of where Surat is and how to get there. Can you do some geographical context setting to Saloni?
Yeah, so Surat is in the tip of Gujarat, and if you want to get here, it is 4 hours away from Mumbai. So you can just catch a train and from Mumbai and reach here in 4 hours or less. And it is there by the coast. So we have a beach in Surat as well, although it's not as pretty as Goa's beach. But that does mean that we face Arabian Sea and there's a river. So it's in the western part of India, tip of Gujarat. You can get here by Mumbai, you can get here by Delhi. It's pretty fairly well connected through all the parts of the country because yeah, it's a huge city. It's an eighth largest city if I'm not wrong. So yeah, it's pretty much easy. We have a airport as well, which was not working since a long time. I remember when I was a kid, the airport would not work, and I always wondered why. But there's another story for that, which I'll not go into that because it will get political. But yes, we have our airport as well, and then yeah, you can get here by flight as well, and almost like from all major cities, you can get here from within 2 hours.
Great. So thanks so much for setting that geographical orientation for us as well, Saloni. And like you said, Surat is very, very well connected and is fairly easy for anybody to get here as well from different parts within the country as well as outside of the country. Now, before we get into the specifics of the walk itself that we cover today and some of the places we highlight, do you also want to set some historical context about Surat, just its past, the different, let's say, rulers or past that have been involved in the city, and just in general, how Surat came into prominence?
Right. Yeah, yeah. We'll be happy to do that. So Surat has always been a port town, but it rose into prominence. I think the golden period of Surat is often called when it was under the Mughal rule, which was in 17th century, which is where a lot of travelers came in and wrote about Surat as well. So it's the most well documented era of Surat where it prospered a lot. So that is definitely there. But of course, Surat existed long before that. I think the castle that we're going to talk about later today, it was made in 14th century. So yeah, definitely it existed like 2 centuries, 3 centuries before the golden period. And even before that, Surat existed as a small town, and I think it was not maybe it was not a major port, but still people still were aware of this region. And before Surat was a port town, I think we'll have to dwell in a little bit about Gujarat's history as well here. But I'll limit myself to the port town. So you might have like come across like Khambat. So Gulf of Khambat was pretty famous, and a lot of trading would happen at Cambay. But the Cambay port started declining it because the Gulf was silting, and they had to like look for a different alternative for a better port. And there were two contenders for the better port. One was Diu, and the other one was Surat. Before Surat, there is another twin town which is Randeer. So I think Randeer was a better contender because it was also already like a better and bigger town back then. Surat was still smaller, but Randeer actually started declining because the Portuguese raided it, and then Surat started growing. But it still had a competition with Diu. But Diu was taken over by Portuguese.
Right.
And then Surat was the kind of an answer to the Portuguese that, okay, even the Gujarat Sultanate has a good port and something that they could, have to keep the trade going. So this competition between Diu and Surat, and especially the Portuguese and the rulers of Surat, this has been a dynamic which has shaped a lot of things. So we don't have a lot of Portuguese legacy in Surat, not that I am aware of yet. Maybe there is, but I need to dig in later. But I think the involvement of Portuguese, the presence of Portuguese, has definitely shaped Surat history a lot. So it evolved as a small town first, and then it became a bigger and bigger port as an answer to Portuguese, and it reached its golden time in Mughal era. And afterwards, it started declining. Because even the Tapi, the same thing which was happening to Kambat, the same thing started to happening to Surat as well. Tapi river was silting, and it was not fit to have a lot of ships coming into the river. Right now, if you look at Tapi, you would wonder that how come such huge ships ever came to the river. But back then, it was the case, but it was silting, and also the political scene was unstable at Surat because Mughal Empire was disintegrating, and then we didn't have a very strong Nawab, and the British took advantage of that. And I think shortly after Battle Palasi, Surat was also like given under, or rather, British cleverly took Surat's control, but they never took it or never controlled it with the method. Oh, okay, we will do the trade from there. They already had Mumbai, so they started developing Mumbai, and they focused on Mumbai. So Surat was there, but it was not the focus. And a lot of merchants migrated to Mumbai, and so it started declining in importance. It was some years later, and maybe we'll talk about this later. I mean, this is a valid question to ask, that how come that despite the decline, Surat survived? There have been actually pretty good research done on that, and but Surat survived somehow. And this has been the spirit of the city. I mean, it is not just the economic disasters that the city has survived. City has survived the plagues, the famines, the floods, and multiple times throughout the history. And still, it's there. Still, the city is there and growing and thriving. So I think it is kind of the spirit of the city that still is there in us, in the people who live in this city. And I may be romanticizing this city a little bit, but I don't blame me because I'm a resident. But at the same time, the Bombay grew, but Surat somehow made it. And then after the Indian independence, the textile industry boomed and the diamond industry bloomed, and it became one of the fastest growing economic city. And now it is kind of a financial, not kind of, it is the financial capital of Gujarat. And when you come to Surat, you would kind of see, because there are like a lot of flyovers, a lot of broad roads, especially in the modern town. So that has been like the story of the city in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think you've done a wonderful job in capturing it in a short amount of time as well, and also does a great job in context setting for the walks we do, right? A lot of these dots, it helps connect these together as to why we saw certain patterns play out. Because a lot of us may not be very familiar with historical past in the background. So thank you for that context setting for us. And in specific, right, trying to get into walk with you today, right? Virtual walk, if I may. Just trying to go around the city and call out a few places of interest and importance. What part of the city are you planning on focusing on today?
So, assuming that you're new to the city, I think I would focus on the main part of the old town. In fact, you can take a walk around the entire old town to see some interesting buildings. But I think I would want you to focus on some of the major, most important buildings that you should absolutely see when you're in Surat. And we would begin this walk with Surat Fort, which was in a very bad condition until 2015. But afterwards, like the government thankfully took notice and then restored it, and now you can visit it again, and it's all previous glory. So they've done a good job at restoring it. So we'll begin with Surat Fort, and then from there we will go to the Mughli Sara area, which is dotted with a lot of historical. Monuments, and shortly in this during this walk we will cover and virtually see these monuments as well, talk a little bit about their stories, and end it with the tomb of the person who actually made the Surat Fort, and we will talk about that as well. This walk would basically give you the idea of some of the British history, because we have a couple of British monuments as well, the Mughal history definitely, and also like the background of how Surat may have looked as a prominent port.
Okay, wonderful. Really looking forward to these. So yeah, over to you. I'll pass it on to you now to speak a little bit more, starting with the Surat Fort, right? Tell us a little bit more about when this is from, the significance of this fort, and also what one would expect while walking into this fort.
So, if you go to Surat Fort and decided to visit it, I think the fort itself can take 2-3 hours for you to see all the galleries. So, usually in my walk, if we are walking through Mughal Sarai, I don't enter inside the fort, but I'll give you a glimpse of a little bit what it looks inside as well, because it's virtual tour. So, I think we have that luxury. So, Surat Fort was in 2015. I remember I visited it once when I was in college in 2015, and it was completely, I had no idea there was a fort in Surat. And sadly, that is the case for a lot of people even now. Even though we have this restored castle, people don't know about it. But I guess it will change as well. When you enter this fort, so to give you a little bit of historical context, it was built in 14th century by Muhammad bin Taghlaq, because he was kind of frustrated by the local tribes, the Bhil tribes, attacking the Surat town again and again. So he built a small fort. So when I say Surat fort, I don't want you to like imagine a fort like Amer fort or Chittorgarh fort, which is like
Right.
huge spread across hills. It is like a small castle which is there by the river. Okay, so we do call it a fort, but I think it is a small fort. But it still had the function of a fort in sense of that we had cannons, and there were like artillery, and then people would like protect the city from there. And another thing that I also want you to like think about this is that when you visit to Surat right now, so you'll just see the fort, but at one point Surat used to be a walled city. So the fort would serve as a better purpose as a walled city. So I think when we imagine the walls in usually in the fort, you will have to like imagine that there were walls with what used with what which is what ring road now, but they kind of destroyed, not kind of, they destroyed the walls, and so there is no, you cannot get the sense of how it actually looked like with the walls. But sure, the fort is still there. So coming back to the fort, you can go into the fort, and there are like a couple of galleries that will give you, since there is a sculpture gallery, there is a woodwork gallery and textile gallery. So there are many galleries, but I think what I would like to talk about is the my favorite galleries, which is about Surat's archive gallery, which tells you briefly, gives you the overall picture of the timeline of Surat, the ships that we used to come in Surat, the travelers who came here, the prominent people who came here. So you would enjoy seeing that in that fort. And the other gallery, which is my favorite, is the travelers gallery. So earlier I've mentioned that a lot of travelers used to come to Surat, and they would come from different parts of the world. We have a lot of European travelers, we had Armenian people living in, Arabs, Turks, of course. But these especially the European travelers have left behind such vivid accounts of the city that it has really helped us understand that what was the city back in especially the 17th century. It was first built by Tughlaq, by Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and it stayed that way. It was a small fort, it stayed that way for some time. And then afterwards, there was this guy called Khudavand Khan, who was basically a governor and a really close friend of Muhammad Begra, the Gujarat, if I'm not wrong, the Gujarat Sultan at the time, whose capital was based at Champaner, which is a town, small town now near Vadodara. So he was based out of there, and like I mentioned before, they wanted to grow Surat as a counterpart to Diu, and he was pretty much frustrated by the frequent Portuguese raids to the town. So he ordered Khudavand Khan that if he could build a stronger fort in the city, and he started working on that project. And finally, most of the castle that we see today, it's because of the design that his designs that he submitted and eventually worked on later. So he was the major contributor, I think, project manager of building Surat Fort. And later on, there were constructions, and they tell you about this when you enter the fort as well. That there is a Dutch construction, there's a bit of British construction, because it was taken over by a lot of other people. So there are like some architectural differences by these additions, but I think the most of all, the overall layout has stayed the same over time.
And yeah, like you said, it is clearly one of the, as a heritage sites within the old city, the core old city that you find today. It's one of the important parts and not to be missed out on. I mean, obviously, ideal way would be doing it as a part of this walk, so you're getting a little bit of a historical connection too. But even if you're visiting it by yourself, or if you're visiting Surat by yourself, definitely one of the spots you should be making a pit stop at. Yeah, please go on to the next point of interest as a part of the walk that you cover, Saloni.
Right. Okay. So right, just across the CNI Church, there is Andrew's Library. I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but like if you come to Surat Castle, I think you would definitely see this library across the road, and you would be like, oh, that's an interesting looking building. I wonder what it is. So I'll just give you a little bit of context there.
Okay.
So Andrew's Library was basically a library that was constructed with a Jain patron and by the British to promote more learning to the knowledge seekers in Surat. It is a functional library even now, not the biggest library of the city, or I think that would be Kavi Narmad Library. But I just thought like I'll give you a little bit of context of yeah, what this library is. Just behind this library, there is CNI Church, which is a 200-year-old church, which was built by the British for the British officers. And if you visit this church, even the furniture, the door frames, the window frames, everything is still 200 years old. They also have a huge Bible, which is again 200 years old. And back in the days when the river was fuller, so the river would be like come near the church. So I think it was built with the purpose of being near the river. So even though you cannot exactly see the river from the church anymore, but yeah, it is still nearby. We are walking by the river right now. I mean, we are walking parallelly by the river.
Wow.
So the church is very interesting that way. What it reminds me of definitely is the British impact on the in the city. That apart from like building this church, British also built schools in the city. They also curated the entire municipal corporation. They've also left behind the cemeteries. They've also left behind a bridge, which is built by this collector called Theodore Hope, who also was a very passionate, I think, administrator who tried to do a lot of good things about the city. And that bridge is no longer there, but we do have a heritage walkway that bridges the river, and that is dedicated to that the earlier bridge that was built by Theodore Hope. So they did like build up some infrastructure. Of course, they left behind their language. You and I are speaking in English right now, and then eventually they built Bombay as well. So British had a lot of like they have left behind a lot of things, but one thing that they left behind, uh, and I wish it was still there, but it's not there, is the first English factory that
Right.
was set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was I think that was people didn't realize it that but then, but now after like so many years, you and I know that that was a turning point in the history.
Sure.
And we no one saw coming what was going to come in the next 100 years. So sadly, that British factory was is in the same area. If it was there, it would have been the part of this walk. But mentally, it is still there in the part of this walk that that English factory was somewhere around this area, and. And it kind of like redefined Indian history forever. And what is also fascinating here is to ask like how come this Indian factory, or sorry, British factory was established in Surat out of all the other places. We had competitors. We had Masalipatnam. Some people also claim that first factory was set up in Masalipatnam, but that's a
Right.
debate for another day. But like there was Kochi, there was other port towns, so many other things that they could have put their factory in. But why Surat? And I think, according to me, the answer would be that Surat was just more rich with trade and commodities. It was so much more linked with the Gujarat hinterland, and it already had a vibrant trading links. And they thought, British must have thought that this is perfect for us to like come and start trading. And this is where things got interesting. So when Portuguese discovered the way to India back in like 15th century, the late 15th century, but it was not until 1612 that first English factory was set up. So for after a gap for 100 years, other Europeans started coming to India. And Portuguese by this time had like pretty much gotten used to monopoly
Yeah.
and also like controlling the sea trade. And when they saw the other Europeans coming, they did not like that because it was competition.
Yeah.
The part of the reason also that they raided or they tried to like loot Surat was because they wanted like Diu to prosper, and Surat was a competition. And when the other Europeans started coming in, they didn't like it even more. So there was a threat of being a Portuguese attack on Surat once again back in like I have 1600. 1609 or 10. I'm not too good with years, but during that time, and the Mughal governor at the time of the city was like really scared, and he didn't know what to do because he knew that the British was really good with their naval technology and everything. So he kind of fled, and but at this time, like the English stepped up and then said, "Okay, we are here to help." They had been trying to set up a factory in Surat for a long time, but that was not happening because the Emperor Jahangir was not kind of convinced to give them this privilege. And that also was because the Portuguese Jesuits who were there in the Agra court, who would always tell them that, oh, don't trust the English. So he didn't want to trust English, Europeans forever, whatever reasons. So that was not happening. But this threat from the Portuguese was an opportunity for the English, and they fought against the Portuguese. And even though Portuguese were well equipped, much more well equipped, and had much more manpower, they won this small battle. It took them 4 days, but they won. And that was a really decisive victory for them because it put them in the good books of Jahangir, and Jahangir them gave them the permit to set up the factory in Surat, and that led to the first English factory. In fact, this was like one of the first. I'm going a little bit off track here, but this is one of the first story that I read about Surat, which kind of blew my mind. That how this we never talk about Battle of Sowali. We
Right.
talk about Battle of Palasi, of course, but like this smaller battle that happened 50 years before, sorry, 100 years before that, was so much more decisive. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that being a Surti myself, but now I know better, of course. And that happened, and then the first English factory was set up because they finally had the permit. But the first English factory is no longer there. But I often talk about this story when we come to this point. So that's our second stop, and from there, like I told you, that Tapi, we're walking by the Tapi River. So there are Ovaros. But before I talk about Ovaros, do you have any questions that you want to ask me?
No, I just wanted to thank you for that additional context you provided as well, because, like I said, if history is purely looked from a perspective of dates and names of people and places, it's so much hard to like sound or be interesting to people, right? But now when you make it a little more relatable in terms of connecting the dots and the significance, like I said, the Battle of Swali or Sivali, right? That's the corruption of the name. That the British use Battle of Swali is what they call it as. How significant that. I don't know if anybody even thought how important or like decisive this would turn out to be in the longer scheme of things, right? Because Portuguese already had a hegemony at that time, and Britishers were coming in as newer, the newer community or the tradesmen at that time, and how it played out in the history of the subcontinent over the longer run, over the next 200 years or so. I think nobody would have imagined. So thank you for touching upon that. And yeah, it's unfortunate that that first factory that was set up, or almost like a warehouse, you could say, that isn't
Yeah.
around any longer, right? But still, I think you mentioning the connection to that and how it came into being and how it was set up, it definitely pays out, and also gives us a sense of the politics of that time, right? How it was going on, the battles that were fought, not just in the courtrooms of the Mughals, but also like here, right, on the port for the dominance. So thank you for including that bit of context as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also very glad that you mentioned that you clarified that factory is a warehouse, not factory in the modern sense.
Right,
And yeah, and I also talk about that because people are more used to seeing the modernized, industrialized factory. But yes,
right.
it was more of a warehouse back then. So when you go into this walk after CNI Church, the next stop that I go is to the Ghanta Ovaro.
Okay.
And to the listeners, I also want to clarify Ovaro is like a Surti term for ghats, basically, and which is the river fronts. But we don't say call ghats. We don't call our river fronts ghats. We call them Ovaro. I don't know why, but it is more Gujarati and it is more local. So and and also unique to Surat. So there are ovaros, and then there would be the different kind of ovaros, which used to be the different parts of the port back in those days. So there's a ghanta ovaro from where like the ships would enter from the Arabian Sea. I also want to clarify, because we have mentioned about Sawali, and I usually Sawali is another small town slightly away from Surat. We also do a heritage walk in Sawali because it's a quaint little town,
Okay.
and of course the Battle of Sawali happened there. And why did the Battle of Sawali happen there, not in Surat, is because the ships would not directly come from all across the country or the world to Surat, because Tapi River cannot take it. It is still small. It will land somewhere in the port of Arabian Sea, by the Arabian Sea. And Sawali was the harbor that was by the Arabian Sea. Okay, so people would like come to Sawali first, and then they would transfer their goods into smaller ships, and then take the path by Tapi River and come to the town, to the Surat town. So that was the usual course of the travelers or the merchants that they would take while when they had to reach Surat. So, uh, so coming back to the port of Surat, so the ships would enter through Ghanta Ovaro, which Ghanta means bell. So, which basically just how we ring a bell when we enter. When I have to enter your home, I'll ring a bell. So that's the same case with the port. That if I have to enter the port, I'm ringing the bell to announce that I'm here. And then they would be taken to the custom house, where they would have to basically show everything, that they have all the goods and everything that they have brought, just like how we have custom house
Sure.
and international airports now. I also want to highlight that we tend to glorify our past a lot of times. But I also want to, and I also talk about this in my walk, that nothing is perfect. Even our past is not perfect. And we complain, and some of the issues that we face today were the issues that we faced that time as well. So, for example, the government was not ideal even back then. There was a lot of corruption there as well, and this corruption would happen here at this scene as well. When sometimes the merchants had to bribe the other person to let them, if there is something, I think, of very precious stone, and the custom house manager really liked it, so it's like, yeah, I'm taking it, and you cannot do anything about it because I am the person who is in charge here. So those kind of things would happen, and they were pretty frequent, and normal also. I think the merchants are used to it, just so that we are used to giving bribes sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, so I think they were also used to giving bribes at that time. And so the custom house, they would declare all their goods. I'd also like to highlight that we don't have foreign exchange like we have today back in 17th century. So how would like the money get exchanged? I'm coming from Spain, so, or not from Spain, because they would go to the North America more. But like, say I'm coming from England, and then I want to trade in India. So, but my money, will that be accepted? No, because we have our own coins. So, what happens to the coins that I bring? So that would go to the mint house that was there nearby in Surat, and Surat has its own mint house. We had to have that because it was very important, and we dealt with a lot of money. So all the gold and the silver and everything that would come in to the city, that would go out. They go to the mint house. It will all be melted, and then it would be made into the Mohammedis or the Mughal coins that would run in the city. So that would also happen, and. And then like there was so the custom house, the location that there is custom house, that is called Furzo Avaro. And then the mint house was somewhere nearby. You cannot see the custom house like physically now. That structure is not there. Mint house is also not there. But at the Ghanta Ovaro, there is a Ghanta there at the entrance, which is still
Okay.
there.
Okay.
So, which is very interesting. And I don't know if it is the same bell that would ring 400 years ago, but I know that it is pretty old. And I like to imagine that it is, because it just makes it more fascinating. So yeah, so you could imagine the port looking like this back in 17th centuries. You can also like, there are like so many sketches that travelers and other people have drawn of Surat from like the other part of the river, where you would see different kind of ships, and those ancient ships, if you can imagine what I'm trying to tell you, that in the river, going so many ships going here and there. Surat is also called Choriasi Taluka, which Choriasi comes from the Hindi word Chorasi, which is 84. So it is said that the people from 84 countries would come to Surat, and then at the port there would be flags from these 84 countries. So that's why it is still called Choriasi Taluka. So I think, so like I've mentioned before, the river now looks completely different. We have dammed it up, so there is practically no water that comes to the city. It is sadly the condition for a lot of cities in India. But back in those time, I'm sure the river was so much more fuller and brimming with ships. That also came with its own problem. Of course, there were times during the monsoon season that the port was closed because it was not navigable. The ships could not travel in monsoon. So of course those things were there. But yeah, in general, this is how Surat looked like as a port back in 16th, 17th century.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate you being so descriptive about it as well, and especially this being an audio podcast. And I mean, whether or not this was an audio podcast, right? Like I said, a lot of these structures don't exist now. So you helping almost recreate that view for us, I really appreciate that. And from here on, where do you move to next? I'm assuming we're still continuing next to the Tapi or the Tapti River, right?
Yes, yes, we are continuing this. I move on to the next stop, which is the Mughal Sarai,
Okay.
which is currently the SMC office. SMC has two office, so SMC Surat Municipal Corporation. The older office is stationed at Mughal Sarai, which is actually a very old building built in 17th century by Jahanara as a travel lodge. Because I think another thing why Mughals loved Surat was that it provided them a really nice route for going to Mecca.
Right.
And there is a region in the Surat city, old city, which is called Makai Pul. As a child, I always used to wonder. I would not wonder a lot about these things, but one thing I remember wondering about this is why is it called Makai Pool? Do I get Makai there, like the corns and everything? So I would, I would
Yeah.
wonder that. But now I know better that Makai is coming from this Mecca pull. So you're going to the Mecca through this pull. Probably it led towards the port and wherever the people would go in to board the ship.
Right.
So that's why at one point, especially during under the Mughal, Surat was also called Bandar Mubarak, which basically means auspicious port. So from the port where you could go to this holy city of Mecca has to
Right.
be auspicious.
Yeah, for the
So
Hajj pilgrimage, basically.
yes,
Yeah.
the Hajj pilgrimage,
Yeah.
and for the Hajj pilgrims, Jahanara built this travel lodge, and Jahanara was in charge of Surat for some time because kind of Shah Jahan kind of liked her, and for a lot of reasons, I'm not going to go a lot of stories in that, but yeah. He gave the in charge of Surat's revenue and everything to Shah Jahanara, so that made her a pretty wealthy woman at the time. So she built this travelers lodge. Although all the rooms are there as offices now, but whenever I go inside, I just try to imagine it as like different kind of travelers living. It has a courtyard in between, and then there are rooms like 3-4 stories rooms by around it. And it's good to see that the building is still there and the building is still functional. It would be awesome if they could turn it into a hostel or something, but I know that's just me dreaming. Too big,
Yeah.
and it's okay.
Yeah, basically, sarais are hostels of the yesteryears, right? That's what they're
Yeah.
called. So Mughal Sarai kind of makes sense. But this is currently the SMC or the Surat Municipal Corporation building, is this what you're saying,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also read up somewhere that, like you mentioned, thank you for bringing up that connection to the Hajj pilgrims. Also, like you said, this port was very like one of the ports, important ports through which most people went for pilgrimage back in the day. That they would basically go through by boarding ships. Right, it wasn't like in the current day where it's so easy, so much more easier. I believe the stay and expenses, right, for such pilgrims would also be basically foregone, right? They won't charge if you're a pilgrim
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to
Sure.
Mecca. You won't be charged for staying here, and a lot of the revenue she made from the sarai, like it would also go into donation. Besides like upkeep and everything, it would go into donations to the travelers, the pilgrims who would be traveling, right? So that kind of gives you a little bit of context about this place and its utility also. Where on from here after making a stop at Mughal Sarai? Where do you move from here?
We go to Khudavand Khan's tomb. If you remember, Khudavand Khan is
Yep.
the same guy who made the castle, and he died in Diu in the war, and his son he made the tomb for him. And but his son was like also pretty good merchant. So Khudavand Khan was not only like someone who fought in the war or was governor of the city. He was also merchant. I don't know how they balanced all these professions at the same time, but they did all of that. And his son was also a pretty important person. And he built this tomb. And what is beautiful about this tomb is that they say that if you know about Ahmedabad famous Jali, what is it
Yeah,
called? Sayyid Jali, yeah,
yeah, the
that
Sidi Sayed Mosque. Yeah,
Ah,
from there.
yeah, Sidi Syed Mosque. Yes,
Yeah.
that the Jali in that mosque is inspired from Khudavand Khan tombs, if I'm not wrong. And and if you visit this tomb, this is like just a it's an extraordinary. It's like an oasis in the middle of desert because there is like a lot of. Of course, there's old architecture as well in the old city, but it is still surrounded by a lot of modern buildings. But there, in the midst of these modern buildings, there's this tomb that you just know looks so vintage and so ancient. And there is a lot of hustle bustle in the roads because the main road, a lot of people come in. But once you go inside the premise of tomb, even though it's not a very huge premise, somehow it just gets quieter and calmer.
Yeah.
It's the vibe of the city. Also, there is some space to breathe in, and with the context of knowing that this is where like the guy who played such an important role in giving this city an identity, the identity of a beautiful castle, is buried here. Who was also Khudavand Khan itself was a very interesting guy. He was not. He was. He so he used. He seemed Islam. He seemed Muslim from the surname of course Khan, but he was not like. He was not born Muslim. He was born Catholic.
Oh,
That too
interesting.
in Italy. And then he somehow came to be in Turkish army, and then he converted to Islam, and that. But he was good at weaponry and other stuff that he did. The emperor was impressed. He came to India because there was this Turk and Indian connection, and because of Jew and everything, and he came there, and then he became like good friends or close to the king, Gujarat Sultanate at that time, and then. And then of course I told you about the Pudiu and the Portuguese, and despite being himself of the European origin, he built this castle against Portuguese, which is what fascinates me so much. That he was, and at the same time, like I mentioned, he was also the merchant, so he was trading with the Portuguese as well, because there were some reasons in the ocean where if you have to pass your ship, you will have to get those Portuguese cards, cartes that they would say. It was like a Portuguese pass that you have to pay for. It was not too expensive, but you still have to pay for because the Portuguese had the monopoly of this sea route, right? So so many merchants tried to bypass that, and if they would get captured, then the Portuguese would like punish them and stuff like that. But many merchants also like just to keep things simple, they would also buy these passes because, like I said, it was not like too crazily expensive. So they would like, yeah, better safe than sorry. So they would do that, and Kotawand Khan would trade with the Portuguese, but at the same time also work against them. At the same time, he has also played a lot of diplomatic role in between. There's this entire very fascinating tale about like. This Muhammad Begra and the Diu war and the entire tussle between the Portuguese and stuff. It gets very interesting. I don't want to go too much into detail because yeah, that will take so much of our time. But I want to circle back to the fact that this guy this definitely fascinates me a lot with being so clever and
Yeah.
to be able to deal with people such a way in so those times.
Yeah, and yeah, like clearly very multi-talented too. By going by what you're saying, right? So many different almost professions, and also starting from, like I said, somewhere born and raised somewhere in Europe, to becoming a part of the Turkish army, to coming here and trading with the Portuguese, fighting against the Portuguese. So clearly he's done a lot of good things, and it's also poetic in a way that basically this is, I believe, one of the last stops of the walk too, right? The tomb of
Yeah,
Khudavand
yeah,
Khan.
yeah.
Yeah, poetic in a way that we started with the structure that was built by him, and we're ending at his tomb. So that also marks quite the journey in itself. Now, quickly, I know we reached the end of this walk, but do you also want to give our listeners and audience a sense of some of the other types of walks you do, and even just in general? Surat has literally been, I know we use the term melting pot a little loosely these days, but it has been a melting pot in terms of when people and different communities coming here, right? Right from the Armenians to the Jains to the Parsis to, like I said, even from the Europeans, right? Dutch and the British and everybody else. Do you want to give a quick sense to the audience in terms of the different types of walks you do as well that might be focused on these different aspects and different areas within Surat?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thanks for asking me this. So Mughal Sarai is just one area that we do a walk on, and but of course there are like different areas in the old city which we could go to and then explore different things. There's cemeteries, British cemetery and Dutch cemeteries that you could visit, and that itself could take like a lot of time if you go through each and every tomb. And Armenian cemetery may not be grand that way, so it's humble in the sense they are not too grand structures. But I really love the epitaphs, which I have no idea what is written on them. Although there is some researcher who's working on decoding that, but you can still see the very beautiful epitaph, which has some kind of symbolism, some kind of in some epitaph there's some angels drawn in them. There's a moon, there's a flower, and then there's some interesting kind of there's a skull sometimes. So they're like different kind of symbols which are drawn in these epitaphs, and I always wonder like what does this exactly mean. But it is fascinating to see that. So the cemeteries are definitely, we do a walk in cemeteries. We have talked about Randir, so we do a walk in Randir. We talked about Sawali, Battle of Sawali. We have also done a walk in Sawali, and there's a beach in Sawali, so that walk ends up like having like chilling at the beach a little bit. Although, like I've said, that's a black sand beach. So in Surat, if you see, all the beaches are black sand. They're not like that. So they're not very glorious. They're not very beautiful like Goa beaches. So that's why they're not popular. Surat is not popular for their beaches. But there is a beach. People do go hang out sometimes. There is another walk that we do called Dumas, which talks about the history of Siddhis. And if you know about Siddhis, then you would know that that itself is so fascinating.
Right.
Yeah, so we talk about that. We also talk about the Burmese connection with Surat, which is in Variav, where a lot of immigrants from Rangoon came in and settled in. We do some walks in Old City again, like in Gopipura, which is built by this famous merchant called Malik Gopi. And so yeah, we talked about merchants of Surat, because they have also been influential. So there is a walk where we of course those merchants are dead now, but like there are some of the things that they have left behind. Some built some temples and stuff like that. So we talk about those merchants and what they did, because they played a very important role in Surat history. We talked about Parsis, because it's a very huge Parsi community that was in Surat, and almost every Parsi that is there in the country, although I know there are not many, if you ask them, there would be some or the other kind of connection that will lead them back to Surat, either through their great grandfather or more, if we go even more back, either they would be linked back to Navsari or Surat.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other community that has impact on the city is Jains, who have they have a lot of Jain temples that you can visit. One temple that also comes in the walk, I've not talked about it, but it comes on the way, is Parshvanath Jain Chintamani temple, which has beautiful. If you go enter inside, it has beautiful woodwork carved across different pillars inside the temple. And what is so fascinating about this temple is that if you don't know about this temple, you'll just pass by it and then not even notice it, because it looks very ordinary from outside. In fact, it's not even complete. It does not even look like a temple. But when you go inside, then you would be blown by what you see. This intricate, very beautiful, very detailed woodwork on the pillars and the paintings and everything. So almost all the walls and the pillars and everything on the temple is covered with some or the other kind of artwork. And of course, there are other communities also, contemporary communities that live in Surat. It's not like linked historically, but Surat has always been a city of migrants. So I think Surat is very cosmopolitan, like Bombay is cosmopolitan or Bangalore is cosmopolitan, where you can expect people from different parts of the country living in together. The same goes for Surat as well, because we have a lot of people coming in from the different part of the country for the textile factory or the diamond factory, where people from Odisha, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, lot of huge Marwari community. We also have like a very industrial belt on Hazira, and likewise, I mean, I've just gotten started with the list, and as I'm talking to you, I'm getting more and more ideas. Up here, but this is are some of the walks that we have done in the past, and we are building over some new ones as well.
Yeah, that's marvelous. And what would be the best way for people who are interested when visiting Surat or locals from Surat for them to know more about you and the walks that you do?
So the best way is to connect via Instagram. So we have this page, surat.heritage.project. I update all the upcoming walks in that Instagram account. So you can definitely connect there and ask us whatever that you want to ask. But yes, Instagram is
Yeah.
the best way to reach us.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we include that in the show notes as well for people who are interested. And yeah, so many marvelous and fascinating walks, and so much in terms of how they vary and differ from each other. Also, it's such a treasure trove for anybody who's looking to explore about Surat and Surat's past. And in my mind as well, I'm just manifesting ways in which we can bring you back for another talk, Saloni, whenever time permits, for covering one of these wonderful regions. Right, there's clearly so much diversity in the port city. Before we kind of wrap this up, I also wanted to end on a happy note, and I'm saying happy note because it's related to food. I'm sure during the course of the walk, people, given that these are 2-3 hour type of walks, people do tend to get hungry as well. Is there any component of food that you mix in along with the walks, or any suggestion you'd like to give about the local foods and local cuisines or places in Surat one should try out?
Yeah, sure. In fact, Surat is known for its obsession for food, especially with the street food. And there is a famous saying in Gujarati called Kashinu Maran and Tapinu Jaman. That means, yeah, it's dying in Kashi and then eating in Tapi. If you do that, then your life is fulfilled. So, although, like, of course, I have been to other parts of the country as well, so I would say that you can get good food to eat in different parts of the country as well. But in Surat, if you come to Surat, definitely I would say try Gujarati farsan, the breakfast, which is of course khaman, dokla, and stuff like that, which is kind of famous. But I think Surati farsan, which is again Gujarati breakfast, is one of the best tasting farsan that you would see and eat. And we have something really unique called locho, which is. Which was basically made by mistake. That's why it's called locho. It comes from locha, that word, and it's a very popular dish right now. We have couple of shops every day. People in the morning they line up in these farsan shops to get locho, to get khaman, to get jalebi, fafda, idra, patodi, all of these things. And I think all of these things you can try. And the this is one of my favorite part of being in Surat. The other thing which is unique about Surat is aloo puri is again a street food. I'm mostly going to suggest street food because Surat is widely much more known for street food. And what is unique about Surat is also that people, you might find people in Mercedes and BMW coming in and parking by the road and then eating by the footpath, from the street food, because that's how passionate we are about street food. So I'm mostly gonna like stick to that. And other thing that is very unique is khause. So khause is, if you know, that it's a Burmese dish basically. But I told you before that there is a Burmese connection between
Sure.
Surat and especially between Randet and Bariab also. But Randet, there's a lot of people from Rangoon who originally used to live in Burma and then they migrated back to India. They settled down in Randet and they brought in their food culture also with them. And that's why we have the street food called khause, which is like the same Burmese dish but with a Surti twist. If you're a non-veg fan, then you can also get a non-veg variety of aloo puri, which is in the Mughli Sara walk itself that I was saying, nearby
Interesting.
SMC office. Yeah, so you can get. That you can eat that as well. And in fact, if you people many times complain that Surat is primarily a vegetarian town,
Right.
which is true, of course. Yeah, you will get a lot of vegetarian option, but it's not like you won't get non-veg options either. If you go to the old city, if you go to Khawgali, Chhapa Bazar is another region where we do walk, which is where the famous clock tower of Surat is.
Mm.
But that was just additional information I threw in. But like, if you go to Chhapa Bazar, you will get a lot of like people have been eating non-veg there since eternity. So you could go and get some like good food there. And the other thing that Surat is also known for is various experiments in street food. So we
Mhm.
especially love eggs, for example, and then you would find
Mm.
eggs in different kind of varieties. You'd not even like imagine that the eggs could be cooked in so many different, 100 different ways. But
Mm.
if you go to any egg stall in Surat, but the famous one is Bhai Bhai. But you can go to any egg stall in Surat in the evening and then enjoy some egg dishes and try something new. So when you are in Surat, definitely I would suggest you to like take a walk and explore some of these street foods, especially the new ones that you see. And then you would definitely enjoy that. And what I recommend is definitely not missing out on locho or farsan, khause, and aloo puri, because
Right.
these are my favorite street food in Surat.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, there's clearly a great offering when it comes to street food, and both the traditional varieties, like you mentioned, as well as the new and upcoming and experimental, if you'd like to call it, right? So definitely try that out. And thank you so much, Saloni. It's been such a wonderful journey, right from getting a sense of the historical significance of Surat, its journey over the time, its golden period, and also what was more endearing to me was how you linked up these stories beautifully, right? You gave us like a full picture. It wasn't just about places or just about people. It was a complete picture for us. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we'd love to have you back for another walk. Hopefully, you have enjoyed the experience too, and we can have you back for a walk. But we'll definitely also see how we could work together and perhaps have some of our listeners or your patrons who can enjoy this experience too that you walked us through virtually, how they can be a part of this walk, right? We'll figure that out and include some additional notes in the show notes. So we'll do some sort of a giveaway where people can be a part of this walk in the future. But yeah, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being on the podcast and covering off such a beautiful aspect of Surat.
Thank you so much, Saf, for inviting me and listening to all these talks that I had to say, because I always wonder that maybe I'm speaking a lot. But I see that if someone is listening and someone is understanding, then I feel so much more like valued and better. So thank you for saying all these kind words, and because they mean a lot. And the bigger goal is not just like Surat is my city, but you also have a city. You also live in a city, and all of us have stories. So I hope this inspires you to like discover yours, because that's important.
Thank you so much, Saloni. It was a pleasure talking to you, and we hope to have you back on the podcast very soon. That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.